Hello, everyone. Welcome to the stream previewing what will be a derby, one of two big derbies in Portugal this weekend, and this may be the last preview stream that we see on the channel before we go to the Club World Cup. And joining me to preview this Porto derby between Boavista and Albert. Boavista and Porto. It's Albert from the Long Ball Football Podcast. Albert, welcome back on. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be. You scared me for a second. The derby between Boavista and Albert. If I had to face those guys 11v1, I wouldn't fancy my chances. I know they've been a bit poor, but I think I'd need some help. But no, it's great to be here. Yeah, and as you say, really a good derby, and a derby that I think some people overlook a little bit, maybe because Boavista haven't been as strong in recent years, so it gets overlooked. But still, it's a city derby. So yeah, looking forward to it.
You would compare it to something like Everton versus Liverpool or Espanyol versus Barcelona.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison at the moment, where there's one team sort of heavily favourites, two teams in different places. I think it's fair to say.
Yes. Thanks for coming on, Albert. Albert generally is a neutral when it comes to the league, a fan of the league in general. Although recently, since Boavista made that had that crazy January window, he's decided to become a fan, albeit take it with a bit of pinch of salt. But that activity has sort of won him over, at least for the remainder of this season.
Well, I wouldn't go as far as to say I'm a Boavista fan. I do also have a Porto shirt in the cupboard. I could have worn that, but I just thought I'd put this on today to give them a bit of love. You know, they need a bit of support at the moment. They're struggling a bit, but yeah, definitely they've been an interesting team to follow, to say the least, especially since January, as you say.
Yeah, key phrase being with a pinch of salt. Let's start off with the Porto side of things. There's been a change in management since you were last on, and last time Porto played Boavista was Victor Bruno's last win. So I suppose before talking about recent Porto games, what's been your thoughts on the change in management and leading up to now?
I think it's been not as positive as I think Porto fans would have liked when the manager came in. I think there was some optimism when he arrived that, you know, in contrast to Vitor Bruno, who it was always going to be very hard for him to shake the image of being Sergio Conceição's assistant, and therefore kind of like a B option, if that makes sense. I think it was always going to be difficult for him to shift that image, whereas Anselmi, I think, was seen as quite an exciting appointment. You know, in the same way that it's exciting to sign young, promising players from South America, playing in the South American leagues. I think it was similar with Anselmi. There was this feeling that he was this exciting managerial prospect from Argentina, untested in Europe, and this would be a good platform for him to showcase what he can do, and then a good opportunity for Porto to get a good manager at the early stage of their career. The reality is, I think it's been a lot more difficult than people would have wanted, and maybe that's a reflection of, you know, where the squad is at. And as I keep saying to myself, as well as the listeners of our show, it's so important to remember that this is still a very transitional year for Porto, with the new ownership, managerial changes, you know, big changes, removing kind of institutions of Portuguese football from their ranks, and bringing in new faces. So I think with Anselmi, I've seen kind of flashes of what could be, and I think there are positive signs. I think what's clear is that the squad still needs improvement if they're going to be competitive next season, which I think is the aim. You know, this season, I think third place is the best that is kind of all they're fighting for at the moment. And I think it is still worth fighting for rather than settling for fourth. So yeah, it's I know that some Porto fans would go as far as to say that Anselmi has already failed and that perhaps there's an argument for moving him on. I personally would disagree with that. I'd say he's not had enough time and there's not been enough squad development yet to kind of truly judge what he can be. I think we'll get to that stage probably after the start of next season, after the transfer window closes, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, certainly I'm divided on the Anselmi matter, but I do also agree that third place it'll make the best of a bad situation for Porto. It'll guarantee either Europa League football, which is if you can't get Champions League, then that's something. I'll hint a bit more on the Europa League in a bit later, but going off the recent few games, since the disastrous, horrible showing in the OO Classico, Porto actually have only lost once, which, albeit the defeat at Estrela Amadora was terrible, but win at Casapia, 2-1 win over Famalicão, did the job done, didn't do much else, and got a more comfortable win against Moreirense, 3-1. Another team that Vitor Bruno was able to defeat quite comfortably. So what have you thought of Moreirense game and some of the other recent games that Porto have had?
I have to say I thought the Moreirense game, the result there was probably a lot more important than some people thought, and not just the result, but the way the game played out. Because the loss to Estrela Amadora was not just, of course, a bad result for Porto to lose to any team outside of the top 3 or 4 is a bad result. It was the fact that they were badly outplayed and just looked completely lost in that game, which was very surprising. And I thought that was a particularly damaging defeat. And put Anselmi in a very precarious position in a way that he hadn't been before that, where performances had been okay, sort of middling to good. But that performance was particularly bad and a particularly embarrassing result where it placed him in a quite precarious position. And I think for the Moreirense game, with going 1-0 behind, that was a huge moment, for the team, playing at home in front of the Porto fans. A not very well-attended game, I have to say, which probably shows where the fans are at. And the fans that are there are kind of probably not in the best mood anyway. To go that goal down, if they don't come back from that, I think there's a real possibility that the manager doesn't last until the end of the season. So I think it was a big moment, and I think they did very well to get back into the game, to show the resilience that they had to, because it's easy for us as fans to kind of sit here and say, it should be easy for Porto to beat Moreirense. But football's not always like that. Sometimes things are just going against you and you can't catch a break. And, the players in that moment could easily have panicked and thought, well, this is it. We're going to lose another game. The fans are going to be on our back. We could potentially lose the manager. But they rallied. And I think the result was, in the end, a very good second half. They did what they needed to do. And hopefully that will be the season back on track. Because like I said, there's not an awful lot to fight for this season, but I think there is a big difference between finishing 3rd and 4th. So I think that's worth fighting for. And if they finish 3rd, you can start to look forward to next season. Whereas if there's more losses and things like that, then I think the grey clouds start to come back. And I don't think it would help anyone to be getting rid of the manager at the end of the season. Really, like I said, I still think he deserves an opportunity to prove himself a bit more going into next season.
Yeah, and another horrible part about that Estrela Amadora defeat was that Braga had dropped points shortly beforehand, and that was a missed opportunity. Although Porto next week did get a second chance and they managed to take it and are currently
Yeah,
third on goal difference. Let's go northwards to Boavista, who a team who, if I recall correctly, they were too limited in what they could do on the summer transfer window. In fact, they might have had a ban.
correct.
They
Yes.
were underwhelming in the first half of the season. Going off what I can remember and from what I can remember when I did the reverse fixture preview with Nino Torres. And then also they had this thing started to go wrong even more, and they had the crazy transfer window. Before we go on to their recent fixtures, what's been your thoughts on Boavista this season?
Well, a lot, because a lot has been going on. If you like, I can give a sort of quick summary of where they're at, basically, from the start of the season. I mean, Boavista, for anybody who's not aware, have been kind of. They've had troubles for multiple seasons. They've been involved in relegation battles. They've had off the field issues with money. They've got a very kind of questionable owner. There's been staff who haven't been played, players who haven't been played, bills that haven't been paid. And they've always kind of been on the precipice of relegation and just managed to drag themselves out of it. And this season was no different. In fact, this season looked to be the worst season of all. You know, like I said previously, they've kind of been on the brink of relegation. For the most part of this season, they were well in the relegation zone. They were very much one of the two teams that you thought were definitely going to go down. They, for the majority of the season, their manager was the Italian Cristiano Bacci, who's actually now the Moreirense manager, who Porto just beat the other weekend. And he was kind of in there doing the best that he could. I remember at the beginning of the season actually saying that I thought they were fighting quite well because they had a very poor squad. And as you say, they were under a transfer embargo, so they weren't able to sign any new players in the summer transfer window. And in the early stages of the season, I saw some fight from the team, and I thought the manager was doing a good job of galvanising the players and at least getting some desire out of the group. But naturally, that does begin to wane, and I think they just kind of slipped further and further away from safety. And they were left at the point where they had to make some changes, and they did so. And they were slightly fortunate because their transfer ban was lifted, and they were able to sign players. Actually, not during the transfer window. I think something bizarre, like the ban was lifted on transfer deadline day or something, and so they were able to register new players. But of course, if you can't sign them, the only thing you can do is sign free agents. And they went on this quite impressive splurge in the free agent markets. They brought in such players as Laivan Kurzawa, the former PSG left back. They brought in, forgot his first name, but they brought in Van Ginkel, yes, formerly of Chelsea, the midfielder. They brought in Vaclic, a goalkeeper who won the Europa League, I believe, with Sevilla, or a team in Spain. So they signed players with good reputations, albeit players who've been out of the game for about 6 months. All of them hadn't had a club, and who were probably getting on a bit. So it was a risk. And the other change that they made was they did change the manager. And I don't think it was because Bacci was underachieving. I think they just sort of let him go and said, look, if you want to go, go. And they brought in Lito Vidigal, who is a bit of a kind of infamous anti-hero to a lot of people. He's kind of the Sam Allardyce of Portuguese football. Someone I kind of have a bit of a soft spot for, though I think he's a very limited manager. Lito did actually win a game, an important game. He beat Nacional, and that was, a win. But it kind of slipped from there, and they lost multiple games on the bounce. And I believe it was now 3 games ago or something like that. They decided to roll the managerial dice again with 5 games of the season left to go. And they brought in a very interesting manager, a Scottish manager called Stuart Baxter, somebody I'm not sure many people are familiar with. He spent a lot of his career managing abroad. He's managed in South Africa. He's managed in Scandinavia, places like that. He did actually manage in Portugal, I think, in the 90s for a very short amount of time. But he came in and was charged with keeping Boavista alive. And in his first 3 games, he played Firenze, also in the relegation zone. He played Sporting, and then he played AVS, who were also in the relegation zone. And they won both the games against Firenze and AVS, the 2 other teams in the relegation zone. And they now sit on equal points with both Firenze and AVS. So they've gone from a position where they were very much the favourite to go down of all 18 teams in the league. And now they sit with a genuine opportunity with 2 games to go of survival, although they have a tough game against Porto, which they wouldn't want. They lost 5-0 to Sporting in Baxter's second game in charge, and now they have Porto. So they've given themselves an opportunity, a lifeline. But yeah, it's funny because, like I said, they just always seem to claw themselves away from relegation. It seems like they're destined to go down, and then they just scrape it back. This has been the
Another
season where
Everton comparison.
surely they're kind of destined to go down more than any other season. But yet still, there's just that slight chance that they could actually do it. So I think it makes them, in some ways, you might look at the Sporting game, they lose 5-0, and you think, well, clearly they can't do it on the big teams. But to that, I would say maybe, just maybe, this is a dangerous team to be playing because they've got nothing to lose and everything to gain, and they'll be fighting for every single point that they can get.
Yeah, and on the last game, beforehand, they were bottom of the league, and
Yes.
getting that win meant they were. I think Ferenc are bottom now. I don't know exactly where Boavista are, but they are tied on points with
17th.
AVS. Those second bottom, it's still very close down there.
Oh no, excuse me. Sorry, they are 16th.
Yeah,
Currently in the playoff place.
Yeah. Going off. You mentioned that they lost 5-0 to Sporting CP. That was a bit of a surprise for me, given that they went away to Sporting CP and played a good game. So I thought they'd make that closer than they did.
Well, the funny thing about that game was when Stuart Baxter joined Boavista, because there was only 2 games until the Sporting game, he was asked, how are you going to deal with Sporting and how are you going to deal with Victor Gyökeres? And his response was, we're going to park lots of buses and see if Victor can get through them. And he scored 4 goals on the night. So, yeah, it was funny to see how that went.
But, yeah, Boavista have won 2 important games. We can discuss the Ferenc game as well, but let's start with the most recent one, AVS. I missed the first half because I was still coming out of the cinema at that point, and that was the earliest screening I could go to that certain movie, and plus I was not in Bristol at the time. But yeah, so it was a big 6-pointer. Second half, my feelings were that overall it was a all right second half. AVS did probably deserve to take the lead, but after that, Boavista looked more likely to score, and they went on to turn the game round, including right at the end in dramatic fashion. So, what was your thoughts on that important game?
Well, I think I enjoyed it slightly more than you, Matt, but I do have a sort of taste for these like real lower table games, so there's a certain enjoyment I get out of them. Although I will say the first 60 minutes were absolutely dreadful. Dire football, 2 teams who could not, for love nor money, create a chance, and you could really see why they were both in the relegation zone. And I just did have that feeling that a goal would really open up the game, and that's exactly what happened. We got the headed goal from Nene, 41 years old. He's actually not been playing that much for AVS. He was a kind of hero in the second division at 40 years old. He scored a lot of goals to get them up, and there was that question of could he do it in the Primera Liga, and he he's done all right for a man of his age. Great experience, but he's not exactly been banging them in. So he's been in and out of the team recently, but they brought him back in for this big game, clearly thinking that experience was important, and he scored the headed goal after about an hour, and yeah, it completely turned the game on its head. Suddenly, Boavista had to go for it. Suddenly, AVS had opportunities on the counter. So, yeah, the game burst into life, and it was end to end. It was chaotic. We saw Seba Perez with a great goal from outside the box to equalise for Boavista. Uh, Later on, I think there was a moment when AVS went up the other end and had a one-on-one chance, which looked destined to score. And the keeper makes an incredible save, and then Porto go up the other end and score themselves in the 87th minute. So it was very chaotic end to the game, a lot of drama. A good watch for the neutral in the end. If you stuck through the first hour, you were rewarded. I think in the second half an hour, in the last half an hour, excuse me. Um, and yeah, maybe you're right that AVS they deserve to open. I agree. Maybe they could have got a second. They did have one or two chances, but you just felt as soon as Boavista got that equaliser, there was only one team who had the momentum, and they had the fans in the stadium, creating the atmosphere. Sometimes you can just tell, Matt. When you watch a game, you can just feel it, and you could feel it in that game, and they got the goal and won the game, and it was a good winning goal as well. Not an easy chance. Marco van Ginkel involved in the build up, which was interesting to see. So those January signings, especially the goalkeeper, proving their worth. And yeah, a great end to the game and a great result for Boavista.
Yeah, massive, and with head-to-head in mind, that's going to also help them.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any of the other recent games you want to bring up, especially the Farenense game, because that was important, or some of the other ones not too long
Well,
ago, before we get it into the match itself?
not in too much detail, just because with the changes in manager, it's hard to reflect on the games with anything meaningful, anything before Baxter came in, and just to reiterate, since he's come in, he ground out that result against Firenze in his first game, and he got the result against AVS. It's important to say that what he's doing with this team to turn the results around. It's not some grand tactical innovation. He hasn't got the time to sort of change dramatically the way the team's playing. So all he's doing is trying to solidify them and give them confidence. And the early signs from the Firenze win and the ABS win are fairly good.
Indeed. Reflecting before we go into this game, I'll give a short reflection on some of the past fixtures. Of course, last time these two faced was with Victor Bruno's last win as Porto manager. Generally, he was good. He was good against the sides lower in the league, but was very he was bad when it came to the big games. But as well as that 4-0, you had Porto coming from behind in the penultimate game of last season, like it is now, to win 2-1, and that was Mehdi Taremi's last goal as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had the 1-1 draw of Tony Martinez scoring the opening goal. And another one that came to mind was the 4-1, maybe 4-2 win, and Danny Namaso Oda from England gets his first goal for the club.
I was in the stadium
in the
for the
league.
game.
Are you?
Yeah, it was a fantastic occasion. He scored a sort of back heel, I think. It was a bit of a scramble, but it was some kind of back heel. And actually, Boavista scored a good goal. I think there was a left back they had that I really liked at the time called Yanis Hamash. I think he was French, and he scored a great goal from outside the box. But yeah, that was a memorable game.
Yeah. And reflecting from the past and looking onto the future, normally it's all the pressures on Porto. But this time I'm seeing like a change in narrative here, because Porto don't have Champions League to fight for. The best they can do is Europa League, and whilst as always the favourite, they've still got to retain that reputation. For the first time in perhaps a very long time, if not forever, this game actually might mean more, and there might actually be more pressure on Boavista, given that they're in the relegation battle. They've got more of a serious situation to fight for, and this is their last home game. So do you read much into that? Do you agree, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the way that will manifest itself in this game is not that we'll see a particularly attacking Boavista side. In fact, I think we'll see the opposite. I think we'll see an ultra defensive team who will see their primary aim in this game as to keep a clean sheet. Because if they do that, they've got a very, very good chance, obviously, of well, they're guaranteed to get at least a point. And I think Stuart Baxter would bite your hand off for a point in this game right now. That would be a great achievement. And I think just the little I know about him as a manager, I think he is a very defensive manager when it comes to big games like this. You know, when they're the underdogs. I don't. He's not. You know, what's a good example? He's not Russell Martin at Southampton, you know, trying to get his team to play out from the back when they're being dominated every week. You know, he's a manager that understands that solid foundations are what are going to get them a result, if anything, in the game. So it's difficult because I think when Baxter came in with 5 games to go, he would have looked at the 5 fixtures. They had Firenze, they had Sporting, AVS, Porto, and they have Oruka on the last day of the season. And I think you would have said if we can win 3 of those games, then we finish in 16th, then we've got a chance of staying up. So in that sense, of course, they would absolutely love a result in this game. But I think for Boavista, it's the next game against Aruca that's much more important because that's an opportunity to get points in a way that this one probably isn't. Although, like I said, if they're going for anything, they're going for a clean sheet. So I think we'll see a very defensive team. The only issue I have with that is they were very poor defensively against Sporting. They came up against the league's best player in Victor Gyökeres, and not only were they ripped apart, but it wasn't just because of how good Gyökeres was; it was because of how poor they were. They had failings defensively in that game, poor organisation, poor commitment from the back four. So that is a big thing that they need to fix in this game. But of course, they don't have the luxury of picking and choosing really when they're going to get the results. They've got 2 games left. They need as many points as they can. So they have to target something from this game if they can.
Indeed. And they would need Estrella. They would need to win both their games at Estrella Amador if they were going to 100% survive. But if they have to finish 16th, then so be it. Certainly Farinense and actually AVS might have got a good chance, but I think Farinense look about done. But
yes, they've got the toughest of the 3 teams in the relegation. So Firenze have got the toughest last 2 games, definitely.
It's going to be it's going to be quite a big one. You mentioned that that you expect Maxwell to go into this game very defensive. How else do you see Boavista approaching this game, and what are you expecting from Porto as well?
Well, from Boavista, very simple. Be as defensive as they can, and if they do manage to nick a goal, that's great. If the game ends 0-0, fantastic. And if they lose, then they just look ahead to the Aruca game and they brush it off. For Porto, it depends how the team is feeling, what the mindset is. I do think actually that they should be quite relaxed, not in a way that they shouldn't try, of course, but I don't think there's too much pressure on Porto because if we're being realistic, their last 2 games of the season at home against Boavista and then playing Nacional, 2 quite
Which
easy
they'll
games.
be at home at.
Right, so 2 quite easy games to end the season, and let's remember that Braga still have to play Benfica.
Yeah, and that's on the last day, and then they're away to Casapia tomorrow.
Yeah, so there's a good opportunity for Porto here to finish 3rd. So yeah, I think, like I said, if as I expect, Boavista are very defensive, then it falls to the creative players to unlock the door, and it helps that they've got one of the most exciting young creative players that we've seen in the league in a long time with Mora. Just signed a new deal as well, so full of confidence, full of the support of the board, full of the support of the fans, and I think he could be a very, very key player in this game. You need those type of players to unlock a defensive team. Similarly with Fabio Vieira, I would like to see him, who I think has improved a lot in recent weeks and recent games, contributing a lot more. Got an assist against Orange, which is very good. And I think, again, another creative player, those players who can find the passes that are going to unlock the defence. So players like that will be key. And yeah, if Samu can get back, keep his goal scoring form up, that will help. So there's a real opportunities for Porto. I think it'll be a game where you have to be patient. But if they're patient and they trust in the fact that they've got the quality to win the game, I think there's a real opportunity to win this game and end the season on a positive, not just this game, but the next game as well.
Yeah, I would happily agree with that. Yeah, I'm thinking Porto certainly will have most of the chances, most of the possession. Not as much pressure is going to be on them as there normally would be. And one other thing, Boavista were definitely a mess against Sporting CP. For the most part, Porto don't have the attackers on the level of Gyökeres, Gonzalez, and some of the others. So there is Samu, who's probably going to reprise his role, and then Rodrigo Mora, who will. So there's definitely, you could say they in particular could be the ones to unlock this Boavista side. But you could also make the argument that the team as a whole probably won't have the same impact that Sporting CP had back a few weeks ago. Yeah, certainly the general thinking for the reverse fixture was that Boavista are going to be opportunistic with their chances. Maybe their attacks will be out wide, given that some of their dangerous players at the time that was from a wide outlet, and that back then Porto weren't the strongest out wide under Vitor Bruno. But we'll see how that plays out, and we seem to have covered quite a lot in a fairly short space of time. Is there anything else before we look over to the lineups?
No, I mean I'm looking forward to it. It's always a game that delivers. I think even if the teams are sort of far apart in league position and what have you, I think there's always the passion from both teams. So yeah, looking forward to a very good game.
Yeah, so let's have a look. Go onto the lineups. Albert, what do you think? How do you think Boavista will line up against Porto?
I would be surprised if anything changed from the starting lineup. I think the team delivered what Baxter wanted. I mean, there's a chance possibly he goes to a back five if he wants to be super solid and goes for a 5-4-1. But I mean, as you can see he brought on Steven Vittoria there, a very experienced defender who, if he felt he wanted the extra stability, maybe that's a player that he brings in. But ultimately, I don't think we'll see any changes. It's like I said, I think Baxter's kind of experienced enough to know that his job at this point is not to be tinkering with things. This is not his kind of little pet project where he can afford to try different tactics and mess with the lineup too much. What he needs is stability and experience. So I think the team delivered. They played well last game. Maybe they bring in the extra defender, but I would be surprised if there were wholesale changes at all.
So you think same lineup?
That would be what I would predict, yeah.
If he does go to a back five, then who's going to be that third centre back?
It would be Steven Vittoria, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
for Van Ginkel.
Maybe, yeah, I'm not too sure to be honest, but it would have to be one from the midfield, yeah.
Yes, certainly Salvador Arca has been one of their main attacking threats.
Mm.
For the Porto lineup, for the limited information I've had on Diogo Costa, I think it looks like he's going to return in a few days, but this game will probably come a bit too soon for him. So I think we'll see Claudio Ramos start, and then I think he'll probably go with the same sort of defensive structure he had done last week, as opposed to the few games beforehand where he put Eustachio in the middle of the defensive midfield and kind of be that transitional player. I think Zepedro will start, even though I don't think he's good enough at all. Nohan Perez, I think he'll be there as well, and Ivan Marcano, I think will also be there, and we'll probably see João Mario on the right, Star Acquio as well. I'm having a look at the bench from the last game. Do you know it? I should have checked this before, but it hadn't occurred to me until now. Do you know if Alan Varela's available for this game?
I haven't heard anything to suggest that he is, so yeah.
Um, probably Fabio Vieira. I would imagine he'll play regardless, but just whether
Yes.
he's going to be in a more attacking or playing as a number 8. Francisco Mora, I think, will start on the left, and then probably you'll see Pepe and Rodrigo Mora, and then Samu up front, which is pretty much the same 11 as that's the same 11 as last time. Not a lot of other options to go by. I will have a look at Alan Varela's possible availability, but in the meantime, would you say would you make any changes to that lineup that he played last week?
No, I'd keep it the same, and I think when you look at the players that came on against Moreirense, I don't think there's really a player there that improves the starting lineup. I don't think, if I'm being honest, there's really a player that came off the bench that's really sort of knocking on the door to getting the starting 11, which is maybe a bit of an issue at the moment because you do want that competition for places. But yeah, I mean, when I looked at the bench in the Moreirense game and with the players that came on, I don't think there was really any impact made by the subs or someone that I thought had been wrongly left out. So no, I would be going for the same starting lineup. I think you're right to point out that the only players that would come back in are the players that are currently unavailable in Diogo Costa and Alan Varela, because I think those two players are, of course, two of Porto's best players. But if you're just talking about rotation, changing the lineup, changing the tactics, yeah, I wouldn't change it personally.
I think there's an argument for Martin Fernandez. You could say he's just as good as João Mario.
Yeah, but then I think, to be fair to João Mario, I think he's played well in recent games. So it's that position has been kind of up for grabs this season. But I do like Martin Fernandez very much. But I think if we're being fair to João Mario, I don't think he's done anything that really warrants being dropped, which is a credit to him, I suppose, because he's put in good performances. And I don't think he's necessarily the most sort of popular Porto player. He's not like a fan favourite, especially, but I think he's done pretty well.
Personally, I'd have Otavio in that back three instead of Zepedro, but I don't expect that to happen. Um,
Not after his birthday party antics.
oh, I'd missed that.
Yes, I think him and a few other players got in a bit of trouble a couple of weeks ago for partying. So I think he's a little bit out of favour
Diallo
in that
was
sense.
another one of them, I think,
There
wasn't
was
he?
quite a few players in the end, but yeah,
Um,
I think he was seen as the ringleader.
although Otavio did get dropped even before or then if it was the party was like 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
but not nonetheless, certainly if not Otavio, then another defender is needed to take over Zepedro's position. And looking at given the midfield's quite thin in our options, we may see Thomas Perez come on. I'm not really sure, or whether he's meant to be like a midfielder or a central defender, because I believe he signed as a defensive midfielder, but
Mm.
whenever he's featured, he's been sent to the middle of central defense.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a weird one there, and also worth noting, Dennis School, he played quite a few games before last weekend, and when the Santa Clara game at home's another example. Whenever he's been given that opportunity, he hasn't taken it. Um,
Mm.
we've even seen a bit more from Danny Namaso Oda, but yeah, we're expecting an unchanged lineup from both sides. Um, let's get over to the score predictions. Not 100% sure on mine. I've got an idea of where I'm going to go,
Hmm.
but I'll go to you first, Albert. What's your thinking?
Well, I think as much as I'm trying to support them, I think Boavista would do very well to score in this game. I think it would be, yeah, I think they do very well to get a goal. I think they will hopefully be a lot better than they were against Sporting. I hope we don't see anything like that performance. I hope they're a lot more defensively solid. So I can see it kind of being a while until Porto get a goal. I can see them being frustrated. But I think the deadlock will break. I think there's a lot of great quality in the Porto side. So I'll go for 2-0, and I can imagine both the goals coming in the second half.
Okay. I'm wondering, do I go with 2 or 3?
Mm.
But I have a feeling Boavista will sneak a goal from somewhere,
Mm.
and given the magnitude of this derby, and certainly Boavista are very serious about this derby and context only, but it definitely well, most likely won't be like a clean goal or anything like that, or something through individual quality. I'm wondering, do I go with 2-1 or 3-1? Porto's best chance is the sooner they can score, or for Boavista, the sooner they concede, the more bleak it is for them. I think I'll lean towards a 2-1 win for Porto, simply because Porto have been a bit lacking recently.
Mm.
Um, they've even not got their first choice goalkeeper, which he did. He had a good save last week.
Hmm.
But I'm slightly tempted by 3-1, but I think I'll just about go with a 2-1 win. I think Porto are going to be the better side. Boavista will keep themselves in it. It might take a few chances for Porto to get the second, but I might even go with yeah. I think I'll go with a 3-1 win.
Nice.
I think Porto certainly, if they are winning, then it'll get easier for them later on when the pressure's on Boavista and they can find a counter attack near the end. So yeah, I'll go with a 3-1 win. But it's definitely an important game this weekend. We've actually got through a lot in a short space of time than I thought. Similar when for the Benfica preview when I had Mikey on. But yeah, the channel has been growing a fair amount since you were last on, Albert. So for those who don't know you, where can the great 8 people who will watch on the replay find yourself and Barney on the Long Ball Football podcast?
Yes, well, if you search for the Long Ball Football podcast, or just search for Long Ball Football, and that's football spelled the Portuguese way, any podcast platform, we're going to pop up there. We're also on Twitter, now X, I guess. We're on there as well. But yeah, we do a show most weeks. When we talk about the league, what happened and all that good stuff. And there's going to be obviously a big weekend this weekend. So yeah, check us out next week because we're going to probably have a big episode out next week.
Yeah, that's definitely one I've got to tune into as soon as it's out. Thanks everyone who has come in and out on the stream, and for those who have been watching on the replay. And thanks Albert for coming on. Great addition. And I'm sure it's always gonna be that way if you ever come back on, which
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
You're always welcome. But yeah, thanks for all the viewers' contributions, and to yourself, Albert. I'll likely do some kind of video or shorts reviews you on the game, and probably some sort of something kind of the same for the Nacional game. Probably a season review, and then more streams come the Club World Cup. But yeah, we're gonna wrap it up there. Looking forward to the derby. I'm sure the rest Absolutely. Of the viewers will be as well, as will Albert. And until next time, Forza Porto.